Well, good morning.
Good morning.
And let me say how honored I am to be with you this morning.
我很高兴今天有机会跟大家在一起。
And how important I think this conference is.
这个会议也是。
Because the message of what we're doing here will go out via the media, the mass media, all over, not just America, but all over the world.
我们在这里所做的，马上就会通过媒体向全世界传播。
Mention was made of the Victims of Communism Memorial, which we have built in Washington, D.C. And you should know that the dominant symbol of that memorial is a bronze replica of the goddess of democracy.
这个刚才提起那个共产主义受难者的纪念碑，这个纪念碑上面一个最有象征意义的就是一个这个铜的那个 was a replica of a
The goddess of democracy from Tiananmen Square.
哦，就是天安门广场上的那个自由女神像，就是纪念碑上面设立。
We could have picked many different symbols to indicate the evil of communism.
我们有很多其他选择来放在这个碑上，但是我们用这个。
We deliberately chose to have a reproduction of the goddess of democracy from Tiananmen Square. That was very important.
我们刻意的选择了天安门女神像的复制品。
And you should know that national leaders from all over the world come to Washington, D.C., come to our memorial and lay a wreath of flowers and say a moment of prayer for the victims of Tiananmen Square.
世界上各地的领袖到华盛顿来，他们会到纪念碑前面去这个献花圈来纪念天安门。
I wanted you to know that.
受难者，我也为大家记住这一点。
As we all know, this year marks the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. And most Chinese welcomed an end to the Civil War, which had convulsed the nation for some 4 years and resulted in the deaths of millions.
正如今天早晨在座的各位所熟知的，今年是中华人民共和国成立70周年。大部分中国人当时对持续4年和造成几百万人死亡的内战的结束是持欢迎态度的。
The people expected peace, and what they got instead was a quarter of a century of unrelenting oppression and the deaths of an estimated 50 to 60 million Chinese under the tyrannical rule of Mao Zedong and the Communist Party.
中国人民期待和平，渴望和平，但是在毛泽东和中共残暴的统治下，他们在随后的1/4世纪所得到的却是残酷的压迫和大约5到6千万人中国人的生命的丧失。
At this conference, we are going to examine 2 overlooked political campaigns of the early 1950s, land reform and the campaign to suppress counter-revolutionaries. The communist government, incredibly, has described this period as, quote, a golden era.
在这次会议上，我们要审视上世纪50年代初期发生的2个被忽略的政治运动，即土改运动和镇压反革命运动。中共当局却把这段时期描绘为黄金时期。
It was, in fact, not a golden era, but a blood-red era that claimed as many as 5 million Chinese. The 2 campaigns were the beginning of a deliberate communist policy of denying the Chinese people the most basic human rights.
但这是确实一个夺走了500万中国人生命血腥时期。这2场运动是共产党蓄意践踏最基本的人权的政策的开始。
There is a French saying, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. And so it is with China, unhappily. 3 months ago, we marked the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, a day that will live forever in Chinese history, no matter how hard the Chinese Communist government tries to cover it up.
法国有一句谚语说：“万事愈变，愈不变。”这个说法在中国得到了验证。3个月前，我们纪念了天安门广场大屠杀的30周年，那是一个将永远被记录在中国历史史册的一天。中共当局无论如何抵赖，都无济于事。
We ask ourselves how many pro-democracy students died that blood-stained June morning. Hundreds? Thousands? The number is still concealed by the government, which insists that the army was called out to put down so-called hooligans and disturbers of the public order.
到底有多少争取民主的学生死于那个遍地血迹的6四的清晨？是数百个还是数千个？死亡的人数至今还被当局掩盖着。他们声称解放军是被调来镇压所谓捣乱分子和公共秩序的破坏者的。
But the truth about the Tiananmen Square massacre, as documented by Chinese dissidents and media reports over the years, cannot be denied.
但是多年来早已被直播中政见者和媒体记录下来的关于天安门广场大屠杀的真相，不可能永远被抵赖。
This is also the 53rd anniversary of another critical event in modern Chinese history, the infamous Great Cultural Revolution, Chairman Mao's personal revolution.
今年也是中国历史上另外一个重大事件的53周年纪念，这就是臭名昭著的文化大革命，那是毛泽东的个人的革命。
And as we remember the Cultural Revolution, we must honor the bravery of one person in particular, Bian Zhonghun, the deputy principal of the Beijing Normal University Female Middle School, and likely the first casualty of the Cultural Revolution.
当我们回顾文革史，我们必须表彰北师大女附中副校长卞仲云的勇气。卞校长可能是文革中的第一个受遇难者。
Miss Bian, along with 4 other educators, was attacked by the Red Guards on false charges. Tragically, she died after hours of humiliating treatment and brutal beating. She was the first educator, we think, to die at the hands of the Red Guards, whose calculated cruelty is without parallel in Chinese history.
卞女士和其他4个教育工作者被红卫兵以不实的指控为理由殴打，在数小时的屈辱待遇和残暴殴打后，卞老师成为第一个死在红卫兵手中的教育工作者。这种蓄意的残忍，在中国历史上是没有先例的。
According to one reliable estimate, 3 million people died violent deaths during the Cultural Revolution. Even post-Mao leaders acknowledge that 100 million people suffered in one way or another.
据一个可靠估计，大约300万人在文革中死于暴力。毛以后的中共领导人也承认，1亿人在文革中受到不同程度的迫害和冲击。
So we have to ask ourselves, is the China of today the same as the China of 1949, or the Cultural Revolution of 1966, or the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989? Of course not. China, for example, has the 2nd largest economy in the world. Why? Because it opened its gates to foreign trade and investment and practices socialism with so-called Chinese characteristics.
我们要问，今天的中国和49年的中国，66年的文革时期的中国和1989年天安门广场大屠杀时的中国还是一样的？ 当然不是，中国已经成为世界上第2大经济体，因为它采取了开放对外贸易和投资的政策，并实施了有中国特色的社会主义。
But much has not changed. 80% of the Chinese economy is controlled by the government that still suppresses basic human rights like a free press, religious liberty, the rule of law, open elections, and an independent legislative body.
但是中国在很多方面依然如旧，中国的经济的80%还是由政府控制，政府还在压制新闻自由、宗教自由、法治、公开选举以及独立的立法机构等基本人权。
The Communist Party, under the now neo-Maoist President Xi, dominates all aspects of Chinese life and society. And yet, brave, determined human rights activists refuse to be silenced. At great personal risk, they continue to call for a free and democratic China. And I believe, ladies and gentlemen, we have several of them with us this morning, and I think they deserve to be recognized with applause.
在准毛泽东主义者习近平主席领导下，中共控制了中国社会的一切，但是勇敢的和执着的人权活动者拒绝被沉默，他们冒着巨大的个人危险，坚持为一个自由和民主的中国呼吁奔走。我相信我们在座的就有这样的这样的这个为人权服务的奔走的成员，我们来为他们鼓掌致谢。
Their bravery is on full display in Hong Kong, where young men and women stand up to clubs, tear gas, and water cannon. As Nicholas Kristof wrote in the New York Times, the majority of Hong Kong protesters, quote, simply yearn for this great city to enjoy freedom to match its modernity.
他们的勇气在香港具体体现出来，在那里，男女青年面对警棍、催泪弹和水炮车发出的蓝色水柱，毫不畏惧。正如《纽约时报》尼古拉斯·克里斯托夫所说的，大部分香港抗议者仅仅是希望这个伟大的城市能享有与它现代化相配的自由。
If we didn't protest, one young woman explained, this might become just another Chinese city.
有一位女士说，如果我们不抗议，香港就有可能沦落为另外一个中国城市。
Sad to say, the risks of violence increase day by day as Beijing calculates how much force, what has been called white terror, that it can use without being condemned by the international community. When might Xi and his communist colleagues turn, for example, to the People's Armed Police, a so-called paramilitary force, to crush the protests?
在北京衡量要用多少白色恐怖力量而不受国际社会谴责时，暴力镇压的可能与日俱增。习近平和他的同僚们会在什么时候用武警这个准军事组织来镇压抗议呢？
Even when might President Xi unleash the ultimate force, the PLA, that turned Tiananmen Square into a red square with the blood of pro-democracy students.
解放军当年使用天安门广场成为洒满争取民主学生的鲜血的红色广场。习近平什么时候会动用解放军呢？
So, what can we in the West do to support the pro-democracy people of Hong Kong?
我们在西方的能为争取民主的香港民众做些什么呢？
We know from history that the road to democracy is not an easy one. It's long, it's winding, and far from smooth. But the destination is well worth the sacrifice, as the peace and prosperity of the free world amply demonstrate.
历史告诉我们，通向民主的道路是不平坦的， 那是一条漫长而曲折的道路。但是自由世界所享有的和平和繁荣告诉我们，这条路通向的目的地是值得我们所付出的牺牲的。
I believe the day is coming, and this is the most important thing that I'm trying to say here this morning. I believe the day is coming, and sooner than the Chinese communists realize it, when China will be free.
我相信，这也是我今天想说的最重要一点，就是中国获得自由的那一天正在到来，而且会来得比中共能够意识到的更早。
How can I say that? Is that unrealistic? Is that just a hopeless dream? No. Let us remember that in January of 1989, East Germany's communist boss boasted that the Berlin Wall would stand for another 100 years. In November of that same year, less than a year, that same year, the wall came tumbling down and communism collapsed in Central and Eastern Europe. Dictators have always looked their strongest just before they fell.
我刚才想的这个愿望是不是太理想化呢？不是的。在1989年1月，东德的共产党头目号称柏林墙还会耸立100年。同年11月份，柏林墙轰然倒下，中欧和东欧的共产政权相继解体，独裁者在他们快灭亡之前，往往显得特别强大。
We know that communist China has problems, serious problems, a slowing economy, a corrupt government, a dictatorial and divided Communist Party clinging to power, widespread demand for fundamental human rights, a seriously degraded environment, and a PLA trying to establish a Chinese sphere of influence in Asia.
我们知道，共产中国正在被一系列严重的问题困扰，其中包括一个正在缓慢的经济，一个腐败的政府，一个拼命想保住自己权力、既独裁又有内陆的中国共产党，广泛的对基本人权的诉求，一个严重退化的生态环境，以及一个想在东南亚建立势力范围的人民解放军。
These problems cannot be solved by a one-party communist state, but only by a democratic government ruled by the people.
这些问题是一个一党专制的共产政权不能解决的，只有一个人民做主的民主政府才能解决这些问题。
As the political analyst Diamond Liu has written, 3 conditions, if they happen at the same time, could bring about a regime change. Number 1, a huge social uprising. Number 2, viable opposition. 3, U.S. recognition of a new government at the right time.
政治分析家刘代猛指出，如果3个条件如果能够同时满足，就能够实现政权替换。这3个条件是：1、大规模的社会抗议；2、一个有生命力的对立派；3、美国政府对一个新政权的在适当时候的承认。
Western protection and patronage of the democratic opposition in China are critically important because opposition is the harbinger of the future.
西方对中国追求民主的反对派的保护和支持是至关重要的，因为反对派就是未来的先兆。
As a first step, the United States must enact an effective human rights policy toward China. Confucius wanted ethical behavior among people and governments, not because he was soft-headed, but because ethics within the rule of law ethics within the rule of law are better regulators than police and wars.
作为第一步，美国应该制定一个有效的用于中国的人权政策。孔夫子要百姓和政府遵守道德行为，并不是因为他的软弱，而是因为以法治为基础的道德准则是比警察和战争更有效的管理方式。
To help bring about a successful change of government without bloodshed, wrote Diamond Liu, the U.S. and its allies must reach out to elements of the Chinese military. Many veterans have staged large-scale protests over serious grievances.
刘代文指出，如果要成功的通过不流血实行政权替换，美国和他的盟友就必须向中国军方伸出手。很多退伍军人早已因为严重不满进行了大规模的抗议活动。
I suggest that democracy with Chinese characteristics is the best solution for the people of China and indeed the peoples of the world.
我认为中国特色的民主是中国人民的最佳方案和选择，也是全世界人民最佳方案和选择。
Democracy, what do we mean by democracy? It means rule by the people. And President Xi and other communist leaders reject such an idea and try to stamp it out whenever and wherever it appears. But democracy is a sturdy idea that is not easily suppressed. We can see that in the current struggle in Hong Kong between those valiant pro-democracy demonstrators and the authoritarian government of that territory.
民主是什么呢？民主就意味着明智。习近平主席和他的共产党同僚不认同这个观点，并在这个观点冒头的任何时候将其扑灭。但是民主这个顽强的理念是不可以轻易扑灭的。我们在香港的争取民主的抗议者和准威权主义的香港政府的对抗中，就可以看到这一点。
In conclusion, I suggest that the Hong Kong demonstrations are a sign of weakness in the Chinese Communist government. The Hong Kong demonstrations are the tip of a giant iceberg, with the Chinese people constituting this below the surface iceberg. They want to enjoy, the Chinese people, basic human rights, and within them is the innate desire of every human being. What is that desire? It is the freedom to live your life, not as government dictates, but as you wish. Thank you so much for listening, Sheshe, and let's have a wonderful conference. Thank you.
就是香港的抗议显示了中共政权的弱点，也是巨大的冰山的一角。希望享有人权的中国人民表达了每一个中国人的内心愿望，即按照自己的愿望，而不是政府的指令而选择自己生活的方式的自由。谢谢大家。